for Apple?
Overseas.
They're in China.
Yeah.
And what are the working conditions for the people who, they're subcontractors who make Apple products?
Not great.
It's kind of slave labor. It's huge suicide rates, wage theft. When they don't make quotas, they're not paid. People climbing up on, they're living in these horrific dormitories. Corporate capitalism is an enemy of penny and regional capitalism. And it is global. It's supranational. It has no loyalty to the nation state. And it is corporate capitalism that has distorted and kind of hollowed the American economy out from the inside.
When I read your book, I see an America at war with itself between white supremacists and neo-Nazis who are trying to make their claim for the end of the world. I see you describe widespread sexual abuse in a hardcore poor industry that is completely frightening.
Utah. I wrote my gambling chapter out of the Trump Taj Mahal before Trump ever even announced he was running for president.
It's in Atlantic City.
In Atlantic City. It's now closed. When I was writing, it was in deep decay. I mean, most of the rooms were mothballed.
Rats.
There was mice all, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, the mice were fighting on the floor and the kind of stuff. People shooting up in the elevators. So I think what was so disturbing for me writing the book was how many people have been affected, especially in the opioid crisis. I don't think the numbers begin to reflect the numbers of people who are addicted to powerful narcotics, depressants, I mean, I list statistically, we're talking about big numbers, large sectors of the American populace that in essence has found ways to check out. The proliferation of hate groups is, I used for the book Emil Durkheim's great study of suicide, where he went back and tried to look, the sociologist, at what were the factors or causes that led people to kill themselves. And he talks, where he coins this term anomie. And I think that's what I'm trying to do, is explain that anomie that has gripped, I would argue, at least half the country, and the dark pathologies that anomie produces. And that fundamentally, if we don't address that alienation, that dislocation, and that despair, if we don't reintegrate these people economically, politically, and socially back into a system that no longer responds in any way to their rights and their grievances, then these pathologies will only grow. And we spoke earlier about the decline of American empire. As the pressure becomes worse, as the economic situation deteriorates, if these conditions go unaddressed, then these pathologies will explode. And I covered the war in the former Yugoslavia. So I know what disintegrating societies that resort to violence can look like. I watched as, after the economic collapse of Yugoslavia in the late 1980s, from a failed, self-identified liberal elite that couldn't respond, I watched these political distortions, like Radovan Karadzic and Franjo Tudjman and Slobodan Milosevic, essentially be vomited up out of the decay in the way that Trump has been vomited up out of a very diseased country.
Well, that was what I was going to ask you. Is how much of what you're describing here is a feature of the person who happens to sit in the Oval Office today versus if anybody else were in that chair?
I think Trump is the symptom, not the disease. He's a con artist. He's a demagogue, and he was astute enough to tap into the zeitgeist. The tragedy for me, there were insurgencies in both of the major political parties, Bernie Sanders and the Democrats. And the Democratic Party establishment was just more astute in terms of blocking the nomination to Sanders. And I would argue that they effectively blocked it. The Republican Party establishment was not able to block Trump. And if Sanders had gotten the nomination, I think he would have beaten Trump.
How would America be different if that had happened?
Not terribly, because with a Republican-controlled Congress, it would have been paralysis. But you wouldn't have Sanders pushing forth the kinds of agendas, nor making the kinds of appointments to the EPA, to education, Supreme Court that Trump has made.
What greatest danger we face comes from the marginalization and destruction of institutions, including the courts, academia, legislative bodies, cultural organizations, and the press that once ensured that civil discourse was rooted in reality and fact, helped us distinguish lies from truth, and facilitated justice. I saw a poll recently, I bet you saw it too, in which Republicans were surveyed, and 93% said, if Donald Trump says it, I believe it.
Yeah.
I think the same poll showed those same people saying, if someone in my family says it, only 63% of people believed it. They believe the president more than they...
When national and political discourse is no longer rooted in verifiable fact, then facts are interchangeable with opinions. Truth is whatever you want it to be. And I write in the book about the nature of the permanent lie, that all politicians lie, all governments lie, as I.F. Stone said. But they lie for expediency. So, for instance, Bill Clinton argues that by passing NAFTA, there will be many more American good jobs. Bill Clinton doesn't make that argument anymore because it's false, and who knows whether he knew or didn't know, but it's false. The press, that their job is to make sure that people speak about a verifiable reality. Those institutions have become corrupted, weakened, destroyed, or replaced with systems Fox, Breitbart, all of these right-wing propaganda outlets masquerading as news. Press that these lies uncritically, and that has corroded discourse in the The institutions, in a functioning democracy, you have institutions, and you cited them, the courts, academia, the press, that their job is to make sure that people speak about a verifiable reality. Those institutions have become corrupted, weakened, destroyed, or replaced with systems Fox, Breitbart, all of these right-wing propaganda outlets masquerading as news. The court system has been taken over and is now being finished off with appointments from the Federalist Society, which is this ideological right wing. So, and that it creates a kind of schizophrenia where you may see reality in front of you, but reality is denied by the power elites and by the organs, the media platforms that disseminate the opinions of the power elites. And that really begins to sound like descriptions of totalitarianism someone like Hannah Arendt would write about.
I don't want to let the clock get too far away from us here without being
the American population and reintegrating them into the country. And of course, the opposite is happening through programs of austerity, slashing welfare. The original welfare program, which was cut by Clinton, 70% of the recipients were children. I mean,
it's called AFDC.
Americans, parts of the population into the embrace of demagogues, hate groups, or seeing them engage in behaviors that are willfully self-destructive. Suicide, for instance, the highest rate of suicide in the United States are middle-aged white men who realize that there's no place for them anymore. And I quote Pope John Paul in his encyclical, or seeing them engage in behaviors that are willfully self-destructive. Suicide, for instance, the highest rate of suicide in the United States are middle-aged white men who realize that there's no place for them anymore. And I quote Pope John Paul in his encyclical on work. Work is not just about the exchange of labor for wages. It is about status, dignity, self-respect, the ability to find a meaningful place in society. And we're not doing it. And the longer we don't do it, the worse it's going to get.
Here's another quote from the book. Politics is a game of fear. Those who do not have the ability to frighten power elites do not succeed. The platitudes about justice, equality, and democracy are just that. Only when ruling elites become worried about survival do they react. Appealing to the better nature of the powerful is useless. They don't have one. I guess I need to ask you whether you are actually advocating the violent overthrow of the United States government.
No, I'm strongly opposed to violence as a
Okay,
method.
let's take the violent out of that sentence. Are you advocating the overthrow of the United States
I'm
government?
advocating the overthrow of a corporate government. I'm advocating the reversal of the corporate coup d'etat in slow motion.
How does that happen?
It happens the same way it happened in Eastern Europe. I covered the revolutions in East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Romania. It happens when people have enough. And
But how is it not? I mean, if the Great Recession, 2008 till whenever, if that did, and all of the corporate kleptocracy that Wall Street got away with there, and how Main Street had to pay for it, if that didn't propel people to rise up, what will?
the next crash. We're getting one. I don't know when, but it's coming. And this time around, the elites don't have a plan B.
So what's it
They
going to look
can't,
like?
they can't lower interest rates any more than they've already lowered them. We're already at virtually zero. So,
What does that look like, that rising up that you see coming?
well, we've seen glimpses of it. You know, the Podemos movement in Spain, where they surrounded the parliament. I mean, large